So in this segment, I wanted to discuss Suella Braverman talking about some sort of pact or coalition with the Reform UK Party, and this would be absolutely terrifying if the Conservative Party managed to get this kind of thing off the ground. So let's have a listen to what she had to say about it.
We have been hurt by the Reform Party because their success has been, as you say, meteoric in a very short space of time. And many of our much of our defeat was because of reform. I've lost count of the number of my colleagues who lost their seats in July because they were reformed effectively.
So that's about, reform taking away effectively Conservative voters or people who may have voted Conservative in the past. There is obviously the argument that, well, if people didn't have an option to vote for like a Reform UK or a UKIP type party, they would just stay home instead. I think we would have seen that a much bigger likelihood of that, much lower turnout potentially. We saw that in some of the traditional safe seats that the Conservatives lost, which is that people just stayed home. It wasn't just you had traditional Conservative voters switching over to the Lib Dems, for example, in the seats they lost to Lib Dems. It was because people just stayed home because they didn't want to vote for the Conservative Party because they're trash.
This is our fault. The Conservative Party failed to tackle immigration, we failed to cut taxes, and we failed to stand up for common sense, patriotic values. And it's our fault that reform has risen. So
this is factually accurate. There were all of those Brexit promises they failed on. The Conservatives consistently promised to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. Failed to do that. They broke healthcare and things like that. They broke public services fundamentally. All of the things the Conservative Party were meant to be good at, well, it's not really public services. Taxes is the main one. They're meant to keep taxes low. They raised taxes to be the highest that they've been, I think, since World War II. So she's not wrong here. It's kind of a bit funny that they didn't really realise at the time how much of a bad position they had put themselves in. But I think, given that they had about 14 years in government, they had a really, a long run in that respect. And, those kind of things come to an end. Eventually, parties do change government. So it's just a question of how long until that happens again. I don't think typically you see a one and done party in government, but it has happened in Britain before. I think Attlee was one and done. So he only had one term in Parliament, in power, I guess. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out for the Labour Party. But a pact like this would be very dangerous for the Labour Party because there are areas where reform can take seats off Labour, and if the Conservatives don't run in those specific seats, I think Yvette Cooper is one. One of those, for example, Ed Miliband is another. It will be very dangerous for the Labour Party if the Conservatives do not run or put minimal resources into those seats, because there's less vote splitting, which is something the Conservative Party aren't typically used to.
So exponentially. In terms of going forward, if you look at the polling, look at this last poll that came out yesterday. If you take the collective vote share of the Conservatives and Reform, we're approaching 50% of the vote. I think it would come up to 47% or something like that. You can't win an election outright on 25%. And ultimately, I'm someone who really does think that we should do whatever it takes to stop another Labour administration.
And this is what the Conservative Party are all about. It's to be in power. That's the thing they obsess over the most. The thing that they will shiv leaders over, the things that they will tarnish legacies over, is to be in power. That's all they care about, and they don't care how they have to do it to get there, what rules they have to break, what promises they have to break, etc. Like we saw them go into coalition with the Lib Dem Party, who were, I think at the time it would have been fair to say, more to the left of the Labour Party in terms of promises around tuition fees and things like that at the time back in 2010. Obviously things are different now, and they did that in order to obtain power. So that the Conservative Party will do deals like this in order to get what they want, which is to be in charge of the country.
And if there is territory for agreement and coalition, I don't know what you call it or what form it takes, and these discussions will crystallise nearer the election. I do think that if there is alignment between the Conservatives and the Reform Party at the time of the next election, if it means stopping another 5 years of Labour, I would support it. We
So,
have.
so I'd imagine it'd be not a non-aggression pact, but it'll be certain seats not being pushed. I think the Conservatives will probably look to push the south of England, which is more typically their heartland, and give Reform more of a free run at the north of England, which is where Reform have the best chance of winning. I think it's poor coastal areas, and the north of England is where Reform will mostly go for it. And the Conservative Party are not doing well when it comes to funding. So if they focused more on their core areas, it will help them out a lot. And I think post-election, they'll probably, if they had the seats for it, they'd go for a supply and confidence agreement, similar to what the DUP had with the Conservatives. Because I think a formal coalition, I don't think the slot would get along with each other enough to warrant that. And I don't know if Reform UK would get enough seats to warrant kind of a coalition happening. But I imagine it'll be some sort of supply and confidence agreement if they ever make it that far. I don't know. We don't know how the next few years are going to play out in terms of how quick are the public going to be to forgive the Conservative Party for all of the damage they have done, and how much will Labour actually manage to improve things? Because so far, I don't think the majority of the country is impressed, based on the fact that Labour's polling's in the bin. And people keep trying to make excuses for them, but let's look at the facts. The polling is in the bin. Starmer is got incredibly low approval ratings. I think historically low. It might be around or worse than Rishi Sunak, despite all of the damage Sunak did to this country. So this will be very dangerous, because they all keep picking at Labour over things like immigration, and Labour won't really have much of an answer for it. They'll keep picking at Labour over stuff like the Channel crossings, which, unless Labour either set up a processing facility in France or set up safe points of entry so people can actually cross the English Channel without having to risk their lives there, they're not going to solve that issue. One of the things I kind of realise is that the English Channel for England is like the southern border for the US, which is a parallel I need to probably bring up when we do another American kind of conversation on the Sunday roast, or if I ever speak to more Americans on the channel. But ultimately, this coalition here will be massively problematic for the UK, a very dark right-wing turn for this country, and it will be attacks on not just welfare recipients and the disabled and people who in that kind of category. It'll be an attack on minorities as well, ethnic minority groups, and that's the thing I fear a lot. We've seen Reform go for a more kind of quote Christian angle, which ultimately isn't true. They're trying to push anti-abortion stuff, and kind of more control over women. I don't think that would go well with the Conservative Party, typically because there are a lot of women in that party who do value things like autonomy, and that they are quite strong characters in that sense. They're not kind of women who would kowtow, I think, to men. Ones that are, I guess, brave. I don't know how I should define it, but so if Reform do push the angle, I don't think it'll work. So I'm rambling a bit here, but point being is, I don't see a formal coalition working. I think it will be a supply and confidence agreement, but I imagine it will very much happen with the Conservatives focusing more on the south of England and their heartlands, and Reform getting a free shot at Labour in the north of England. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.